operational buy-in. And how many of you were here last PMI meeting? Where the lady, I forgot her name, I wrote it down, spoke about change management, the role of the executive sponsor. That was very, very important. And I was glad I was here because a lot of that dovetails into this type of stuff. To me, she was kind of up here. I'm just getting us down to a lower level of when you're actually sitting at the table with your team, with your CEO, whoever it is that you meet with. These are the types of questions that you need to start. That's my turn. That you may want to consider starting to ask. So, is leadership supportive of these efforts? Does leadership know what you're doing? Does leadership have a true appreciation of what change this could mean, what impact this could mean to your operations? Particularly if you have, like an electronic medical record go in. Has anybody ever implemented electronic medical record? Like an Epic? Jeff, you have? A couple of you have? Implemented those, and what happens to productivity for about the first week or two? Productivity tanks, right? So at the end of the day, what's the most important thing that they need to understand? Workflows. How does this change my workflow? How does this change the way I call Kevin? Do I need to call Kevin anymore and tell him, hey, we just got a stat order in the pharmacy, blah, blah, blah? Or does Kevin now know that spits out on a red piece of paper in pharmacy that says stat order and, pick it up right away and go take care of it? If nobody's told you that, and before you waited on that phone call, you're not going to be looking at the printer, right? So that's the type of detail that it takes to truly do these things. And leadership needs to understand that. So leadership needs to know we've got to have super users. We're going to have a drop in productivity. We're going to see an impact potentially to our ROI for X period of time. But you know what? Plan that stuff out. Put on your risk mitigation hat. Okay, that's going to be a risk. Put on your hat before you even do the budget. Budget those dollars in there for your backfilling your positions, for your physicians to be super users, for these people to be able to participate on the team. Because if you don't have a good team and a good support strategy, you're not setting the project up for success. Does that make sense? Has leadership set clear expectations? I'm right now working at Wake Forest Medical Center on a couple things, that small ICD-9 to ICD-10 project. We're doing an Epic upgrade. If you know Epic, electronic medical record, we're doing an upgrade for that. And there's a lot behind the scenes for ICD-10 as well. But I'm also trying to help them prioritize 200 projects they have on the plate with no way of doing that. So all these leaders think, well, that's my top list and I'm not taking anything off. Well, guess what? At the end of the day, there's not enough resources to do it all and to do ICD-10, which if you don't get in by October of next year, you're not going to get paid by CMS. I'm thinking that's a pretty strong driver for a hospital. If you don't get paid by CMS, you're probably closing your doors. So, has leadership set expectations? Has leadership come to the table and said, no other projects are happening until we get this one done? Has leadership gone through that? Or are they still saying, well, yeah, you can do that, but I still need my 5 done? Those are the hard conversations that need to be had. And frankly, it could be above mine and your pay grade for someone else to have it, but people need to know we've got to have these conversations, right? Unless you've got a bucket of money that you can go buy a bunch of consultants and bring in to do everything for you, you need everybody on the same page. Because some of these things cannot draw away from the major projects that have to happen, right? Okay, is leadership enthusiastic about the change? Are they excited? Do they know this is going to be a great improvement for us? When I worked with Scott up in Richmond, we did an Epic implementation at one of many facilities, and the chief nursing officer, I just thought she was going to be right there on board with us. She despised what we were doing, right? She despised what we were doing. So you know what? It's really hard for her to go out there, and she's responsible for 2,000 or 3,000 nurses to get them involved in wanting to do this. How do you do that when you've got a bad attitude about it? Even if it's to 2 or 3 people, that negativity is like wildfire, right? Those people can't be your executive sponsors. Somebody else needs to be replacing them because they're not doing you any favors. Anyway, so the bottom line here is when you're thinking about people, you really have to think about what motivates the person. If you don't give somebody, an end user, an incentive, how are you getting them engaged in the process? And it doesn't have to be monetary, it doesn't have to be, it could just be kudos or thank you or, you know, you want to be a super user and getting different recognitions, that sort of thing. So think through those as you're doing that. And this is where your soft skills really come into play with project management. It's funny, I've taught some PM classes before, and one of my whole slide decks is nothing but soft skills. Because frankly, the technical skills, the hard skills of the tools and the templates and such, that's easy. It's the soft skills of having those conversations, negotiating, you know, can we do this, can we do that, how do we do this, blah, blah, blah. It's those soft skills. And you'll hear me say probably more than once, because it's going to be on my epitaph when I die, it's all about relationships. So how do you optimize your processes? So when I worked for Bon Secours, we had 14 hospitals. We were implementing in 7 different states. We were implementing one system for all of those. So when you get down to each state's different, each place may have a different service line. I may do behavioral health here. I may do, you know, women's and obstetrics here. I may not. So without going through all that, things are very, very different. Very, very different. So I challenge you to think through workflows. It's not easy, but what we wound up baking out was about 300 plus enterprise workflows that we then took those to the facilities, met with their teams, their work groups teams, and we'll show those in a minute, and reviewed all those. And you know what? When the project was actually over, we don't disband some of these work groups. We keep them going because guess what? You're always going to have updates or modifications or changes to make, etc. So those things are going to change, train the team, so forth. Right? So, let me see. Sharing that workflow information with testing and training. How do you sufficiently do your testing and your training of your systems if you don't have your workflows baked out? How do you do that? To do what the vendor tells you to do? How many of you have been burned by that? Yeah. Jeff. For sure. So, you know what the vendor is, and I just debated this when I was at HCA with one of our CFOs. He's like, oh, GE, they need to be running this project, they need to be running this project. And I said, I completely disagree. They have no vested interest in making sure that this stuff is done right. They just want that technology in there, somebody putting their hand on it, and then they get a paycheck. That's all they care about, right? What else do they care about? You think GE cares what we think? What? So, and the focus here is to you don't have to go every single one to be standardized. You know, the 80-20 rule. There's a few things that are going to fall out that, you know, are just very specific, unique to some department or whatever. All right. Have you ever heard about the difference between an installation and an implementation? Very different. Installing it, that's what GE wants to do, right? That's what your vendor wants to do. They want to get it installed. We want to get it implemented. We want to get it where people are using it, we're seeing the benefits, we're rocking and rolling, we're moving on to the next, right? We're learning our lessons to take to the next to make it even that much better. Have you created a list of evaluation criteria? This is another thing when I started at HCA a few years ago, people would come stand on my door and say, well, I need ABC system. I need a developer to do ABC too. I need this and that and the other. I said, well, where's your list of requirements? Oh, well, don't you know it's just that stuff? No, I sure don't. Where's your list of requirements? It's not rocket science. None of this is rocket science. If it were, I can assure you, Karen Scott would not be teaching. So functional requirements, again, those things go back into your testing, your training, it all loops back in. So if you do your planning and what you need to up front, give me 5 hours and I want 4 of it to do my planning. Because if I baked out my planning like that, that hour is going to be very efficient. Right? Do you have the appropriate technical resources? Do you have the appropriate skill sets on your team? I'm working with a gentleman now who supposedly is directing a PMO, 0 skill set to direct a PMO. He's been there for 3 years. Nice guy, very nice guy. But he doesn't have the skill set to do that job. And unfortunately, I, as a consultant, have had to tell his bosses, sorry, but he does not have the skill set to do that job. I'm happy to be here, happy to help get him here to where he needs to be, but he is not the one that needs to drive it the way it is. That's why they haven't made any progress in 3 years. So skill set, do you have the right skill sets? And if you don't, that doesn't mean you gotta throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Either work on a plan to get somebody where they need to be, or you might have to find a different resource. Have you assessed the proficiency of your staff's computer skills? How many of you would really understand that some people still don't know how to use a computer? Yeah? Are you saying you don't?
No, I have a number of people who just are lost.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting thing when you're doing something like an electronic medical record where it impacts almost every single individual in a hospital, even your people who are cleaning your rooms, everybody. Not all those people, for one, they didn't even all know how to speak English. So we had to get past that. We had to develop a system that didn't just have English, but also had Spanish on their screens. So those are things that you have to consider. Physicians, that was the hardest. We actually had to do basic training classes just for physicians, you know, because, oh my God, nobody can look at me and know that I don't know how to do something. They're really, and you've got to be sensitive to that. You've got to be sensitive to where people are and where they're going to get the most out of what you're giving them, okay? So, but we had many classes for physicians to teach them how to type. And the physician that I had on one of my first projects with Bonsucor was a 65-year-old surgeon, didn't know how to type, didn't know how to do anything by the time we were done. He was our best champion, and he knew how to type. That's a beautiful thing, right? Getting them there. Have you compiled an accurate list of all your current hardware and software? Oh my word. Wake Forest, you know, it's an academic medical center, so they have all these legs and stuff. And I'm doing ICD-10, right? So I'm working, they actually have Deloitte in there too. We're trying to come up with a list of what all applications this company has. It doesn't exist. We've had to pick up every rock, and this is a major, I mean, Wake Forest is not like a small little place. They have one database that has all their systems listed in it. I was shocked. How many of you have all of your systems documented somewhere? None? Oh, one, Jeff? Bob? Dave? I feel it. Okay. But think about it, if you don't have that list, how does that impact your optimizing your processes? If you don't know where all your printers are, if you're doing barcode scanning, if you're doing all these other things, and you don't know where your hardware is, are you optimizing your technology? Are you going to have what you need, when you need it, where you need it? Because when you're doing those workflows, remember, go back to workflows. If I'm changing that now, instead of a phone call to Matt, it's going to be a printer, guess what? I need to make sure that printer is somewhere close to where his workflow is. And or he knows where to go get it. See how it all ties back together? Workflows are key. Have you inventoried your IT infrastructure? Where are your network jacks? Do you have enough power? Do you have conduit everywhere you need it? Are you going to need more? We just brought in, at Wake Forest, we just brought in, I don't know, 10 or 15 people because they're doing chart audits as we're doing ICD-10. And the team just got a bill for about $600 because it was too much power for that room and we blew the circuit. So, hey, now here, ICD-10 team, can you pay for this new circuit to be installed? Those are the things that you need to think through. You don't want those aha moments, right? That was an aha moment. You don't want those aha moments. Then you have to put on the, be very reactive, the hair's on fire, and setbacks, and have people there who are not being able to be productive because they're waiting on you to do something. Not the place you want to be. Have you tested every component and outlet? How many times have you gone to even a power outlet and it doesn't work? And it may not be at home, it could be here, it could be at, an office, big auditorium or something like that. How bad is it? We thought we were going to have that situation tonight. So understand where your technology is. Does it work? Is it sufficient? Do you need more? Do you need something different? Are we now going to lab label printers and we need a different kind of zebra printer or something like that? You have to get very, very granular. Two-way communications, key. Provide those opportunities. Once you do go live and do flip that switch and you have your go live support and all that, pull together forums, pull together ways for these groups to come back together and tell you, this is what's working, this is what's not working, I need some help on this. You don't want it to just be a gripe session, but you appreciate they're probably frustrated. If a physician or clinician hasn't been able to figure something out, they're probably frustrated. So that goes back to that soft skills thing. How do you temper that? But they want to be heard. right? They want to be heard, they want to be understood, and they want a response. That's all they ask. That's all they ask. Involve the frontline staff. Back to my point earlier, the director says, I know how my staff does this. They did. She did. Involve those frontline people. If you want to determine your risks, if you want to determine what your workflows are, get the people who do it in a room. Be flexible. You have to be very flexible. Things change, a power outlet doesn't happen. How do you turn around and make that happen? How do you, training's gone awry, how do you pull somebody else in? Testing, your box just blew up, you got to send all these testers back to their offices, and now their managers are mad. You've got to be flexible. You've got to plan for the unexpected. Well, that's the next one, expect the unexpected. Don't make assumptions. Does everybody know what assumptions do? I won't say that because I'm on video, but don't make assumptions. We all assume a lot. We all assume, hey, she's done this before. She probably knows what she's doing. Don't assume that. I could have done something very different before and just make it sound like it's the same thing. Provide feedback, that feedback loop, and build relationships. Build those relationships. That is more of what we all do than anything else is build relationships. The more you have people on your team, the more your people are loyal to you. There's going to be that connection, so when things do get tough or do get tight, or you need to say, hey, can you do this favor for me? That relationship will get you a long ways. Really, really will. Training and support, there has to be 100% participation. Eliminate distractions. Back to my previous point, if I've got Tanya and she's one person, she's awesome and she's wonderful, but she can't necessarily do 6 things at once, right? So we have to eliminate, what are those priorities? What are those things that she really needs to focus on, and how do we remove the barriers to getting that done? Practice, practice, practice. The other beautiful thing is if you're able to in your systems to have a sandbox or a play box or whatever you want to call it, where once the person has had training, they can go in and play and keep up their competencies, particularly if they had classes. You try and do classes 4 to 6 weeks before a go live. That's a long time for a lot of people, especially if you're early on. Give people an opportunity, a method to go keep their skills up. And they'll come back and ask more questions or say, hey, I saw this, is that right? Or it just continues that two-way communication. Lunch and learns, tip sheets, those are great things. We've done tons of those. Talking about whatever topic, it just depends on what's going on. But they're great, especially if you can provide lunch. That's always good. Provide relevant training. How many of you have sat in a training class and it had meant nothing to you at all? Why am I here? I thought this was going to be ABC and it was XYZ. Know your audience. That's why tonight I appreciate that we've got different industries here, but at the end of the day, I think all of these it's the basic concepts of these things that flow together. But know your audience, very different if I'm having a conversation and teaching a class to that group of physicians versus to that group of your executive leaders. Very different. And workflow training. I had to add that. Because again, it goes back to truly understanding workflow. Getting people to know what we're doing today is going to be different tomorrow. And you also have to see people, have you seen that? The adopters and the adoptees, there's a bell curve that shows you the cycles that people get through when they're going through change. And it's like anger and mad and guilt and all these different things until they get over that and get on the other side. Give people opportunities to get through that, but recognize it and you can help them get there quicker. So we worked with this lady, her name is Sharon, and she was driving me crazy, frankly, early on because she kept talking organizational development. We gotta talk, we gotta tell these people what we're doing. Talk. And I'm looking at her like, oh my God, Sharon, these people are very smart. We gotta talk about all this stuff, really? And now I have to kiss the woman's feet because she's absolutely right. She is absolutely right. We make a lot of assumptions that people know everything we know about what we're doing, about the system, about whatever. You can't do that. How do you do that if you haven't talked to people? So that whole organizational development, the structure there, and kind of come around that facilitative leadership and those skills are your success factors. That will make your project successful. and you'll learn a lot. And it'll be better for the organization as a whole. Then you'll look back and say, because I do look back when I was working with Bon Secours, and I do say, because we were adamant about, once I got it drilled in my head, that we were gonna go through these processes. Very successful. We walked out of the door with 85% adoption of CPOE, which is computerized provider order entry, where your physicians and your providers go in and put all their orders in for you as a patient in a computer instead of on a piece of paper now. 85% adoption, that is like unheard of. And that's what we were able to do at Bon Secours, because they did it right. That's what drives adoption of technology. So, how do you pull all this together? I was doing the slide deck and I was like, how do you tie it all in? This is just an example of how we've tied it in the past. So we have, obviously you have your executive sponsors, your project leads or directors, and the way we chose to structure it was to come up with work groups. And I think at the end we actually added 1 or 2 more, revenue cycle and something else. So I wanted to give you just some thoughts around this, and I'll show you where this presentation is going to be on our website. You're welcome to get it. But workflow work group, we had one whole work group that focused on nothing but workflows in that hospital. How does each department talk? How do all these other groups talk? So on that point, the company that I'm with now, he showed me this thing the other day, and I said, man, this work plan doesn't look like it's been updated in forever. He says, oh, well, this is how we did that. He showed me a list of all their departments that are going to be in this new facility. And he said, we asked all of their department managers to send us a list of all the activities that you need to do in your area so we can create a work plan. I said, are you serious? Is that how you really do that? What are they begging for? Silos. If I'm just focusing on this, that's all you're going to get, is I'm just focusing on this. Well, guess what? A department like respiratory therapy, they're an ancillary, they got to go all over the hospital. They're coming to your department. They're coming everywhere. They're not just going to be sitting in respiratory therapy. Your pathologist, on the other hand, they may be one that just sits there and looks at stuff and they don't do anything else. But you got to consider that. Don't set the project up to be silo-based. So when I saw that recently, I was just like, oh my word. Again, this person who unfortunately doesn't have to be project management, but we're getting in there. Staffing and training work group. Major, especially if you're training 3,000 or 4,000 people, like you do through these major implementations, you gotta have a very well-oiled machine to get that set up, tracked, competency test scores done, and all that. And your staffing requirements. Who's gonna take care of the backfilling of those positions when you got somebody sitting in class for a couple of hours? That sort of thing. IT work group, devices, interfaces, security, downtime, reports, etc. That's what that group took care of. And each group had a lead, a work group lead. They did charters, they did work plans, and they all reported it up to me, and I did an executive dashboard. So executives always knew what was going on. Physicians work group, obviously. Communications work group, planning, newsletters, memos. Clinical content work group, what content do we need in our system? Again, could be very different based on your service lines and that sort of thing. But actually, that's the end of the presentation. And see, this is what we do, right? Is this us? With the air, how many of y'all travel often? How many of you are on planes a lot? Do we do this? How many of you can recite the safety thing when you're on the plane? So, other questions or comments? I just wanted to plant some seeds for you to think through these things. And you saw it was a bunch of questions, right? But that's what it is. Think, think, think. Ask, ask, ask. Don't assume. Don't judge. Be flexible. And and on one presentation that I do, I actually have a tombstone on it, and it says the year, and it says the goal of this year is to think. And it has just a bunch of questions all the way around it. And the last question that comes up is actually not a question, it's just a word. Listen. Listen. Because we're so busy thinking about what we're going to say next that we're not listening to what that physician says, or we're not listening to what that SME says. We're not listening to those people. Why? Too distracted. Blackberries, iPhones, iPads, phone calls, whatever. Listen. So, I'm just here to plant those seeds for you, ask some questions differently. You can go to our website, it's on the slide. slide deck here, and it's on business cards, it's on those things on there. There's a spot on the side of our website that says downloads, and you can click on that, and it'll ask you for your name and address, or not your name and email address. And if you want us to contact you, yeah, if you're interested in talking to us about what we're doing, and if there's a role for you, then say yes. And if not, say no, that's fine. If, once you hit submit, it'll pull up a sheet that has several other tools and templates that we have out there that we've just used for years, that we're, that we've added this there too. So, questions, comments? Wow, 10 minutes to go, how about that? If I get an A+?